you got the call about your interview with Prince Andrew. What's the first thing you think about when you know that you're the person being charged with arguably the most important royal interview in our lifetimes?
This week on High Performance, Emily Maitlis.
I did a job that I absolutely loved, right? I worked at Newsnight, BBC Newsnight for 20 years and I loved it. But it really took its toll on me. I was living off vodka and caffeine, and it sounds crazy, but the one was to wake you up when you were too tired to think, and the one was to send you to sleep when you were too wired to sleep. 2014 to maybe 2018, I was traveling a lot. I was covering really traumatic events, and I'd done 2 weeks, literally where you change beds every single night. I'd be lying if I said it didn't actually take its toll in a sort of human way.
So can we ask you about you as a journalist now as opposed to a BBC journalist?
Yeah.
Because you've made the decision to walk away from the institution. Would you tell us a little bit about your decision to do that?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so we've come to the point in the afternoon that I know you're all very excited about after all our conversations this morning about high performance in the workplace, high performance from a personal perspective. We're now going to meet someone who truly is high performance. She's a broadcaster, an incredible professional. She has carried out one of the most talked about interviews of the last few years, if not the most talked about interview of our generation. But what goes on behind the scenes? How does this person view high performance? It's time to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Emily Maitlis. Hi. How are you?
Well, I'm very well. All the better for making my entrance with a cup of tea. But it is that sort of time of the afternoon. I hope you don't mind.
Absolutely not. Apart from your tea-making skills, how would you describe high performance?
I think it's about getting yourself to a place where you are happy with who you are. And it sounds very obvious, but actually, whether it's about what you look like, what you feel like, what you sound like, whether you're getting up each day to do a job that you like, love, rather than something that sort of terrifies you or defeats you or frustrates you. I think it's about finding your inner place where you can say, I've actually got to somewhere where, you're going to have bad days, you're going to have really bad days, but broadly, you sort of think, I sort of, you like who you are, you like what you're doing, you like what's around you. And I suppose that for me is quite important. It's a mental place rather than a sort of a grades place.
Yeah. I think that some people think high performance isn't about that. They think it's about success, right? But what value does success carry if you're not happy, if you don't have that inner peace that you've just spoken about? So would you mind sharing with us how you got to that point, what the journey looked like, and perhaps some skills that you employ that other people listening to this could?
I think it's about working out for yourself what's going to result in you feeling like the day's gone well. And it sounds really sort of silly, but, I did a job that I absolutely loved, right? I worked at Newsnight, BBC Newsnight for 20 years, and I loved it. But it was very satisfying, mentally challenging, intellectually, but it really took its toll on me. And it took me a long time to admit that there were times I was living off vodka and caffeine, and it sounds crazy, but the one was to wake you up when you were too tired to think, and the one was to send you to sleep when you were too wired to sleep. And I just look back to that. There was a sort of crazy period, I'd say around 2014 to maybe 2018. I was traveling a lot. I was covering really traumatic events. I remember getting off a plane, having been on a sort of circuit campaign following Donald Trump, around sort of America in 2015. This was, before he'd been elected, before we even thought it was, sort of a proper sort of chance. And I'd done 2 weeks, literally, where you change beds every single night, and you're flying internally every single, and you spend all your time in sort of aeroplane air that you can't breathe, eating rubbish food, all the rest of it. And I came back and I remember my phone had broken. And so you can't operate as a journalist without a phone, right? It's just sort of rule number one. And I remember thinking, it was Friday, and I was like, should I just leave it for the weekend? I'll just be completely switched off. It doesn't matter, it'll be fine. And then I just had this niggle. And I was like, no, I've landed. I'm going to go straight into the BBC. I'm going to get somebody to check it out. They gave me a sort of, replacement. I got something, got the SIM card. I was like, okay, well, fine, I've done that, but I'm not bloody switching that on. And then the Bataclan attacks in Paris kicked off. It was the 13th of November. Remember that really well, because it was Friday the 13th. And I remember hearing my phone at 2 a.m. and just thinking, I can't deal with this. I don't even know what country I'm in, what bed I'm in, what city I'm in, what time it is. My time zones were completely shot. And I literally sort of reached out. I think I'd taken a sleeping pill as well, and just shoved the phone under the heaviest book I could find. It was about war strategy, 1,000-page tome. I was just like, I'm just going to sink whatever's happening there and not deal with it. And I just turned it off. I was just like, I couldn't deal with it. And it kept ringing. And at 6 a.m., I was like, okay, there is something telling me to get up. And it was my editor saying, get on the next train, to Paris. And I remember asking this dreadful question, which every journalist recognizes and no human being ever wants to ask, which is, how many?
Yeah.
And I was literally there sort of going, am I making this choice depending on how big the tragedy is? I don't want to start thinking like that. That's an appalling way to think, but that, I think, reflects what I was sort of going through physically and mentally. I just couldn't deal. I hadn't had a proper night's sleep. I hadn't had my phone working. I hadn't, I drugged myself to sleep and pulled myself awake. And they just said, we think it's more than 100. Get on the first train. And you haven't really got time to think, right? So I always have a grab bag ready, and I would just sort of, the trouble was my grab bag had already been used because I'd been grabbing to go to America. So I had to sort of start all over again, where are your clean underwear? Where's the bits and pieces? And I remember getting on the Eurotunnel, Eurostar, and an email came through, and it was an advisory, and it was meant to be a really helpful advisory from the BBC, and it said, anyone travelling to Paris, beware of an unmarked black Renault, which is packed full of explosives. And I was like, Jesus, it's unmarked, it's a black Renault. What am I, and I remember thinking, that's not helpful, because, how can I be aware of an unmarked black Renault, that might be full of explosives? And so all it does is sort of fuel your paranoia more and more and more, because you're going towards this place that was still live, that was still full of terrorists, that hadn't been tracked down, that had 130, I think it was, dead by that stage. And you've still got to do a professional job, And so I think just recognizing just the toll that is taking mentally, on your head and on your body. And I remember, sort of turning up sometimes at vigils in the US. I did a lot of awful school shootings and, gun crime events. And I would turn up there and I'd go, right, is the vigil 6 or 7? And I thought, no one should know the pattern of a US school shooting vigil that well, that they know it's either going to be 6 or 7. I don't want to know the drill. That's not a drill I ever feel comfortable, being able to kind of plan around. That's not the person or the journalist I wanted to start off being. And so I realized I was getting into this slight, mindset where I was just covering trauma, almost like a really normal thing. Going, come on, I think the vigil will be at 6. It might be at 7, but if it's at 7, then we'll just get, Starbucks first. You don't actually want that to be your mentality or your head. And of course, the adrenaline of it and the sense of a story well covered or an interview well done or a sense of being in the place and hearing the voices of people and the tragedy that they were feeling. People telling you their stories is very flattering. It's very emotional and it's a sort of trusting sense. And so it's great in the sense that you think, yes, I've delivered something back to base. I've done this, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't actually take its toll in a sort of human way.
Yeah.
So what strategies have you learned, Emily, that anybody here or listening to this would be able to adopt and employ to be able to keep that demarcation between a demanding job professionally and demanding challenges outside of work?
I've learned that you try and keep your promises to your kids. And I learned that the hard way because funny enough, I was just remembering back because it's my son's birthday next week. And when he was 2, baby, I got offered this shift I just thought I couldn't turn down. I just started presenting and it was an amazing Newsnight shift. And I sort of threw him at my best friend and said, because they had birthdays, kids very similar birthdays. I was like, can you take him? He'll be fine. He's only 2. He won't remember. And then I went on it. Well, it's sort of true, but you do. That's the trouble. And I went on air and I did possibly like the worst interview or the worst collection of interviews I'd ever done. My head wasn't in the right place. I was really stressing about so many things. I felt I kind of undervalued his day and all the rest of it. And actually, in the clear light of day, in the logic, he's a darling boy and we get on really well and he never comes round going, oh, you weren't there for my 2nd birthday. But there's something about you trying to get your roles right that I think is really, really key to that whole period. And sometimes it's not for the kids, it's for you. It's exactly what you say, Damian. It's that sense of demarcation. And a few years later, many years later, I think it was 2014, and I remember my editor called me up, and it was another one of these, like, can you, get that? Sometimes it's really funny. Sometimes at the BBC, you get an emailed plane ticket before anyone's had a conversation with you. So I'm not kidding, you're just kind of scrolling through, you're like, oh, gosh, I'm booked on a plane to Glasgow. I wonder when anyone was going to say anything, or I was like, Hungary, Budapest. Anyway, this time it was about the refugee crisis, and they said, can you, there's a big full sort of steam of a story gathering. A lot of refugees are arriving from Syrian war in Hungary, and Hungary's closed its railway station and it doesn't want to take them, and they're all building up on the concourse and they're trying to get to Germany. And it was a really extraordinary and actually pretty emotional story of people who had kind of left a war zone and were trying to get to what they thought was the new Jerusalem, the sort of new promised land. And my deputy editor said to me, can you go and cover this story? And I said to him, no, sadly, I've just booked a llama tour for my son's birthday, and I've got the cousins coming. And he was really kind of delicate with me. He's like, yeah, do you think maybe the story is quite important? And we could find a way around it. And I was like, well, I have paid the deposit, and it. I don't know what I was doing. I had paid the deposit and it's in Peterborough, so obviously I've got to go up to, Northampton. It's going to be quite complicated. And I now recognise that actually what happens is there's a slight sort of vacuum hole in your brain which takes you from the present, which is like, oh, I've just booked a nice llama tour with my kids and their cousins, to, oh my God, the biggest story in the world is kicking off on the border of Hungary. And you have this space where that side of your brain hasn't quite computed that side of the brain. And so you end up kind of sounding like complete Wally and going, no, can't cover that because I've paid the deposit on the llamas, And then I remember my deputy editor, Neil, just went, I'll just leave that with you a few moments. I'll come back in 15. And of course, can't remember what, normally for me it's a run. It's something physical. Just shakes it all out, kind of, And I suddenly went, I'm not about to give up that story. But I am going to get back in time for the llama fault. And I did Hungary in sort of 48 hours. And then got to bed at 2:00 that morning, woke up at 4:30 to catch a 6 a.m. flight home, and you could not see me on that flight because I just took a blanket and put it over my whole head and just went, can't talk, can't think, can't breathe. But it was really important to me, on some level to get back to that. And I'm not at all trying to set up, and I think this is really important, I'm not trying to set up impossible standards because, again, it actually wouldn't have mattered if I'd missed the story. There are plenty of other brilliant journalists that could have done it. And it wouldn't really have mattered if I'd missed the llamas because there are plenty of other ways you can celebrate a birthday and all the rest of it. But I'm just sort of taking you through my mindset, which was that at that point, it felt really important that I didn't lose track of the kind of sort of the things that were keeping me sane, the continuity, side of things.
I actually think it's a really valuable thing to share because, we talk often on this podcast about empathy over opinion, and this breeds empathy for the life that you've lived and the career that you've had. And actually the opinion for most people would probably be, look at Emily Maitlis, powerful, glamorous, well-read, bright, hardworking, in-control person.
Do go on, Jake. I mean, I don't want to interrupt. I just think, we can fill a lot of airtime with this.
That's only my opinion. Where was I? But actually, the truth is that, we're all struggling, we're all searching, we're all trying to find a way through. And I think this conversation about, doubt and imposter syndrome and fear and not knowing is a far more powerful conversation than actually just going, I find life easy, which none of us do. That's the truth. So I'd like to fast forward to the moment that you got the call about your interview with Prince Andrew. What's the first thing you think about when you know that you're the person being charged with arguably the most important royal interview in our lifetimes?
It's 4 letters.
Yeah.
You can choose what it starts with, but that's the first thing that goes through your head.
Right.
So just as I'm talking to you now, I can feel my solar plexus and I can feel the sort of
you remember that feeling?
Yeah. I mean, it's not a one-off. It's every time somebody comes to you with, an interview.
Yeah. Where were you then when you found out about this one?
Well, funnily enough, it wasn't that I was told in that way because we had been part of the bidding process. Right. So right from the very beginning, we had a brilliant sort of team at Newsnight and we had gone for, I think, 2, possibly 3 visits to the palace. And the first time we'd met his advisor, his sort of assistant, and we kind of came out and we were like, I think that went well. When you can't quite tell, you're like, did that go well? I think it went well. Yeah. Was it all right? Did she like it? And you replay each other's words. Like, oh, she liked it when you said that. Oh, no, but she liked the bit where you said, oh, I think, are we okay? Anyway, and then you're just playing a waiting game. And to be honest, there are so many interviews that don't come off, right? We're always bidding, bid for everyone. You bid for presidents and popes and God, and you just keep bidding basically. Yeah. And so it's never a surprise when something doesn't come off because by then you've just had to, realign and move on to the next thing. And so we kind of did it, and then there was a little pause, and then we got invited back. And at the point where we were invited back, I was like, okay, this is quite serious.
So can I just jump in there and ask, what's going on in your head? You said that 4-letter word is your immediate gut response.
Yeah.
What are you telling yourself?
I'm fighting 2 things. So sometimes you deceive your own head, right? And I do it quite often. If I'm scared of something, I go, oh no, I don't think it'd be very good. Oh no, I don't think it's that important. I don't think it'll really work, So instead of saying, how amazing, you try and push it away and you go, oh, I know, I don't think it's what we do. I don't think I'd be very good at it. I don't think that's for us. You know, you find ways of sort of excusing the not doing it or the it not being a success. Oh, well, I don't think anyone was really expecting that. You know, so you're trying to put a little bit of insulation between you and failure, aren't you? Because the alternative is that you say, I'm going to do that and I might screw it up. Right? So instead of admitting that to yourself, which is too big a thought in one go, you go, oh, I don't think anyone would, I don't think we'd really miss that. You know, and the truth is, no one, if we hadn't got it, no one would know. So you've always got that to hide behind. No one knows, right? Until you actually do it. But you're palpitating because you are thinking, this could be the biggest thing I ever do. Quite simply. I mean, professionally, journalistically, this could be the biggest thing I ever do. And if it goes wrong, it will be the worst thing I ever do. And you never think, this will be the best thing I ever do, because that's not how I'm wired, right? I think this has all the potential to be a car crash, which it was, but not necessarily in the way I was sort of thinking. And so, yes, I think you try and protect yourself from the fear by saying, oh, you know, lots of things going on. So that's the sort of neurological feeling, which is, I'm really nervous, I'm really scared of this. And that's when you need a brilliant team around you, because your team is the person who says, of course you're going to knock it out of the park. Of course it's going to be brilliant. And we're going to get to that place, right? And it's never you on your own. It's brilliant camera people. It's brilliant lighting. It's brilliant sound. It's the person who is role-playing with you across the table, right? Who is being the prince, who is putting you through your paces. And I can honestly tell you that my editor, Esme Wren, played that role and she was way tougher. I mean, I was terrified of her by the end of our hour, because she would push back at me in a really sort of hurtful, incisive way that left me sort of stuttering. And actually, that's the next thing, isn't it? It's preparation. You want to be so clear and sort of just learned in a funny way. It's a weird word, but you know what I mean. You want to know your
How did you know
dates.
what to learn, though? Like, what was the focus of your preparation?
I went through every bit of research I could find.
Right.
So I treated it like a school project, right? Type in the name, read everything that has been written, watch every documentary, go and follow all the different splits on the trees. Who's that person? Who's Stephanopoulos? Who's that? Who was at the party? What were they doing? Who's Virginia Giuffre? What's her connection to him? What's their connection to them? What's the date? Why does it matter that was Florida, not New York? What's the difference between the jurisdiction in a Florida court versus, you know, a little St. James Island? So you are trying to, again, insulate yourself from mistakes, right? I wanted to be word perfect. I couldn't tell you those dates now, but if you'd asked me that, I would have done it like a mastermind candidate, you know, contestant. I would have said, no, that was 2017, not 2008, you know, or that was the 18th birthday, not the 21st birthday. That was the time he went there. Sorry.
Well, no, I'm interested because I love the depth of research you do. But before you start that, do you have an objective for that interview? If you had to define what success would be for you?
It's a really simple objective, actually, which is that you want to get the most out of your interview and out of your interviewee, right? It's as simple as that. So if I'm doing an interview that leaves people confused, I've failed, right? And if I'm doing an interview which has interrupted or cut somebody short or not got to the bottom of something, I've failed. And so the way we prepared for it was, I sort of think, you know, in Lego, like when you're just freestyling Lego, you build your blocks. If I'm making a house, you get your foundations in place. You don't just build one tower up, right? Oh, I'm just going to follow this one thing I've learned until topples over. You go, first question, second question, third question, fourth. Where's the bridge between that one? How am I building on that? And so there's a series. If you go back and look at the interview, I was just trying to get things confirmed. So, did you go there? Did you go to the Manhattan House? Yes, I did. Did you go to the island? Yes, I did. Were you on the jet? Yes, I did. Because if at any point the answer's no, then 10 questions you've got don't work. So if he'd suddenly said to me, I was never in the house in Manhattan, I was never in the Epstein house, suddenly I'm thinking, oh, blimey, I've got to rethink that. And you've got to recalibrate really quickly. So part of an interview is you explaining to the audience what you're doing. I'm just checking that I've got my facts right on that. I'm checking I've got my facts right on that. Then you did that. Is that right? Yes. Then I think it was 2018, you did, whatever it is. And you're building the structure of the narrative that everyone understands. So all that is not difficult stuff, but it's slow.
Yep.
And if somebody had said at that point, you've only got 5 minutes, the whole thing would have been over, because I couldn't have ever got to a place where I was asking, as it were, the bigger questions, the fundamental questions, the allegations that I was putting to him only worked once you had the whole structure sort of solidly in place.
The value for people is really great here, because it doesn't matter whether you're interviewing a member of the royal family or you're focusing on a job or something in your life that's important, the attention to detail, finding tools and ways of calming yourself, which is what you did, really important as well. So you do all these things. You tell yourself it doesn't matter if you don't get it, but you still do get it. Then you do the deep work, which we should all be doing for things that we really care about. I'm sure you had some fear, which is a great indicator that this thing actually matters to you. So you sit down with your producer and you work and work till between you've nailed it, right? So there's very little I'm sure you could have done extra when you walked through the doors of the palace. Even so, with all of that prep, please tell us how it felt to walk into that building.
Dreadful. I mean, dreadful, actually. And you can tell the nervous, like I normally, okay, here's a life secret, right? I'm the most efficient packer I've ever met, right? I love neat packing, right? This is a detour, but I'm just going to give you an example of this. I always travel with a little coffee pot, like a stovetop coffee pot. And I was with my boys once in a little sort of beach place, very sort of low-key, really sweet. And I put the coffee on the stove. The morning after, we got there late, put the coffee on the stove to start the morning after. And the lid starts popping up and down. And I'm like, oh, that's a bit weird. What's going on here? And I see, because it's pressure from the thing, I see this little red child's sock start to push the lid open. And my boys are like, Mum, what have you done? And I was like, sorry, I saw a cavity in the coffee pot and I just thought I'd put all your socks in the top so that I wouldn't waste any room in the luggage, right? They were literally, the socks were packed in the coffee pot and I forgot, and then the coffee started boiling the socks. Not a great start to a holiday, either for my coffee or their socks. But I'm just saying, when I go on holiday, I'm very, very tight and tidy with my packing. The morning I went to Buckingham Palace, I had a bag so big of what? Extra jackets, extra shoes, extra trousers. It was a slight, reflection, I think, of the state of my mind.
Yeah.
That I couldn't quite decide. I was like, what if I've got the wrong thing? Or what if I have to go outside? Or what if I'm, it was almost too prepared. Instead of going in and saying, I'm very happy. I'm very happy with what I've got on and that's fine. I was like, I might spill coffee, I might spill tea, I might be sick.
So what did you do to come out of this red brain?
I hid in the loo.
Did you?
Yeah. I hid in the loo. And I'm not really joking about that, because the one thing I would say is that a good interview is made in the 5-minute silence that you spend on your own before it. And I think that is golden time. For me, it's golden time. And what do I mean by that? That as soon as you're shown into a room, particularly an overawing room, like a a Buckingham Palace ballroom, which was where we were, everything starts. You know, there's people kind of checking makeup, there's lights, there's somebody miking you up, there's people coming to shake hands, there's somebody who introduces themselves, there's like, do you want a tea? They're all lovely, it's all helpful, but you lose your silence, right? And actually, at that point, you've got your game face on, and you go, "Oh, hello, lovely to meet you. Oh no, oh that's kind of you. Oh no, I would no sugar." You know, you're starting to be somebody that is sort of playing the social game, right? And I suddenly realised that I just wasn't ready. I just wanted 5 minutes on my own, so I excused myself, and I said, "Oh, you know, is there a ladies? I mean, it's not." You know, a lady, it's a Buckingham Palace loo. I mean, it's sort of amazing. And I just locked the door, and I remember just sort of sitting in the corner going, right, where's my head? How do I find clarity? How do I just let everything go silent? I don't want to be saying hello, don't want to be shaking hands, don't want to be fiddling around, don't want to be checking buttons. I just want to know where my head is before I go in and do this interview.
What did you find?
You wait for a single note. That's what you do. And sometimes you have this blinding clarity. I can't explain it any other way, but you've got this fog of questions in your head or on your sheets or your notes. I had like 30 questions. And then you think, just like you've said, Damian, what's the question that you're asking? What's the purpose, right? And we always say that in news with headlines. If you can't write a headline if you can't tell a story in sort of 5 words, it's probably not the right story. It's probably not the right headline. Once you've got the clarity and that single note sound, which is like, what am I going in? I'm just going in to find out. And that was the moment when I realised that the only role I had wasn't to trip up, it wasn't to confuse, it wasn't trying to be. I was the one person in the world at that point who could ask the questions that the women wanted answering. Right, that was all. And so actually, I found a place of relaxation because suddenly you're just the conduit. And you take your own mind out. It's not my ego, it's not my questions, I'm just trying to get to a place where the questions that everyone has been asking, that have been, ricocheting around the press and, why did he do that? And what was that about? And how did he go back? And why was he still friends? And should he have known about the thing? And blah. That's all I had to do. I just had to be the sort of the cable that asked the questions. And that was what I was there to do.
So when the interview goes on then, and it gets to where you've established the facts, you've built the foundations, then you have to ask those searing questions. What was going on there? Was it still the process of just asking the question, or did you have a pause for thought to maybe check yourself and go, do I dare to go in with this?
You're listening so hard, because the trouble with questions is if you're not careful, you're sticking to them, right? And as you both know, sometimes that's the worst thing you can do, because you miss what they've just said, right? So the most essential bit of that whole process is your ear. Like, has he just told me that?
That takes bravery though, doesn't it?
Well, I think the whole thing takes a different mindset, which is, do I know what I'm trying to ask here? And it's not that you're not asking the questions that you sort of want answered, but you are listening. And there were certain points in the interview where I thought, oh, that's interesting. Oh, gosh, I wasn't expecting that. Just little phrases that were used, which told a whole story in themselves.
Like what, for example?
Like when he said he'd been too honourable, right? That was one of the phrases he used. I said, why didn't you tell Epstein after he was, convicted of paedophilia, that you couldn't maintain a friendship with him. And he said, I went to his house. Maybe that was wrong, but maybe I was too honourable. And I just thought, oh, that's going to strike a really weird note, right? I'm not sure that's going to sound how he wants it to sound. And so that was one. And then there was another point where he talked about, I said, didn't you hold a party for, Ghislaine Maxwell? And he went, no. And I thought, oh my God, I've got this wrong. Because I had my notes and I'd checked and I'd done all the research. And I was like, no, my research is crumbling. And then he looked up and he went, it was a straightforward shooting weekend. And that was the point where I just thought, but I get it. Yeah. We're on different sort of visions of reality here. Because he meant, like for him, a party is 500 people. It's a ball. And the straightforward shooting weekend was kind of 16 people staying in a country house.
He's not going watching llamas, is he?
Right. It's just, the trouble is, I totally got it.
Yeah.
I got the fact that within his context, that was totally different, right? But it didn't mean that when I'd said there was a party, I was wrong. It just meant that, for me, a house party with 20 people is quite a big deal, right? For him, if it's fewer than 500, that's not a party. And so it was just sort of recalibrating, kind of understanding that genuinely from his own position, from his own, obviously, exalted, very different childhood, he came at things very differently. And so there were just those moments where I had to sort of just tweak my brain a bit and understand that he thought he was, he was clarifying, and he was, but there were just these odd turns of phrase, yeah.
So let's talk about the reaction then to the interview. Because I think that in the modern era, particularly in the social media era, the interviewer is as under the microscope as much as the interviewee. Yeah. So the interview comes out, and I'd love to know how you react to other people reacting to your work. How are you with scrutiny and all that sort of stuff?
It went out on Saturday night, and I had my friends staying, and we always do a run to Kew, right? We do a long, sort of 10-mile run. And so next morning, Sunday morning, we got up and we ran along the bank, did our river run. And she said, oh God, we got to talk about this. And I was like, no, I don't want to. I was really happy with it. It was all fine. It had nice feedback, but I just didn't want to talk about it. I was like, no, when I'm panicking about something, then I want to talk, right? My running chats are really important because they help me sort out my head and my brain and, I don't understand this, and am I getting this wrong? Once I've done something, I'm like, yeah, let that go. I was very happy to let it go. And I remember we ran all the way, and then we got to our little coffee shop, stopped for a coffee, and just a couple of people said, oh, like the interview. But that was it. And so I actually came away thinking, it was actually quite quiet. It's all been quite quiet. I hadn't seen any of and then obviously the press over the next few days just kind of took off. I think I'd expected it to be a quieter landing in a way. And you are under the microscope. Of course you are, But I think at that point I was happy with the job we'd done. And I also knew that we'd been very careful each step of the way that we were including the Palace, and his team in what we were doing, what time it was going out, checking after it had gone out, were they happy? And so we felt there hadn't been any ambush, there hadn't been any moment where it was like, just slip that one out. It had all been done rigorously in accordance with what they knew was happening. And so actually, I could walk away. I sort of walked away from the noise at that point because I sort of thought, yeah, you know what, I'm in my head, going back to the start, in my head, I'm happy with that. I was fair. They knew what we were doing. No code of honor was broken. There was nothing under the, under the,
Yeah.
what do I mean? You know,
Under the radar, yeah.
Yeah. And so it was it was fine, actually. And I think, it was good. But I think going back to your question, what we've seen now, and it's really interesting on interviews like Andrew Tate recently on the BBC, or Elon Musk, who also did the BBC, that there is no automatic authority for the journalist. And what do I mean by that? That, in the halcyon days, in the olden times, you go with your cameras and your mics and you've got your platform and you are the sort of authoritative, I'm the journalist, I'm the broadcaster, and I'm interviewing you. And now, particularly, Elon Musk, right? He's got his own platform. So as soon as he does an interview, he whacks it out, right? So there is no sense of the journalist dominating the interview. Same with Andrew Tate. He recorded the whole thing. He puts it out to his, what is
His own
it,
platform,
8 million or 16 million, So you as a journalist feel seriously scrutinized because you are their interviewee just as they are your interviewee. And I think that does change the whole dynamic. It makes it very tense, actually.
Well, it levels the playing field,
It
certainly.
does,
Yeah.
So can we ask you about you as a journalist now, as opposed to a BBC journalist?
Yeah.
Because you made the decision to walk away from the institution. That seems like quite a brave move. It seems like it was it would have almost been a bit of a comfort blanket to have been surrounded by that. Would you tell us a little bit about your decision to do that?
I think I don't really believe in a job for life, actually. And I mean, great if it works, great if you're happy. I'm not saying that everyone has to change job, but actually, for me, I'd done 20 years. And it's a big chunk of your life, in one place, on one show. And particularly a show, as I mentioned, that doesn't get you to bed before 1 a.m. I was raising kids, going to bed at 1, getting up, running at sort of, getting a kids off to school at sort of 6:37, then running, then having to catch up on everything for the day and then start all over again. And it does take its toll, actually, on your body and on your sort of brain. And I think I decided that 20 years was enough, or going to be enough.
Yep.
And then actually what happened was I'm just obsessed by US politics. And we had the best, most extraordinary election, of 2020 in the US, where it was the COVID election, Biden versus Trump. And then Trump wouldn't acknowledge that he'd lost. And then he brought all the lawsuits. And then we had the whole thing with the hair dye and the, garden centre and the press conferences. And then it culminated in the January the 6th riots. It was an attempt to overturn democracy. And actually the idea that I would leave during that whole period was just crazy. And so I kept on staying for the next bit and the next bit of the story. It's like not being able to sort of walk away from the story. And so I suppose really it was once we got to the end of what felt like the end to me of that whole thing, which took us into 2021, that I started thinking, okay, now it's probably time to, look for the next thing. And I don't linger on goodbyes. I've noticed that about myself, that I'm not somebody who, if I say I'm going, my friend always says I'm terrible at parties because I have this sort of quit while you're ahead, just go enjoy it and then just get out. So I don't, unlike my mum, if my mum says goodbye and she's still there an hour later, normally with exactly the same person that she's just said goodbye to. And there's nothing more frustrating than going, Mum, I think we've done, I think they're trying to, they booked us a cab.
People who don't say goodbye at parties say 5 years over the course of their lifetime saying goodbye to people. So
is that right? What am I going to do with that?
Well, look what you've done with it.
Fill my coffee pot with socks, probably. So I suppose I'm not big on nostalgia. So once the decision was made, And it really helped me that I was leaving with mates, right?
Yep.
So we always describe it as a sort of Thelma and Louise moment, you know. I mean, without the sort of, hopefully the, you know, kind of suicide. But, you know, fingers crossed. But we left in what felt like a fast car with the roof down and our hair blowing in the wind. And there was something quite exhilarating about that, you know, because we weren't leaving out of, you know, anger or umbrage or even, you know, boredom or anything. We were leaving because we were like, I think we've got a plan here, you know. And yeah, I've got that thing again when I sort of talk, I'm like, oh my God, this could all have gone, you know, belly up, could have gone really badly wrong. But we thought we had a plan. And actually you have to be prepared to fail, right? You have to be prepared to fail. And if I had failed at that point with what we want to do next, I like to think I would have gone, well, I had great successes. I had great stuff. I wrote a book. I did the interview. I, you know, did stuff. Let's see what comes next. But I think it was really helpful for me to know that, yeah, I'm going towards something. I didn't ever feel like I was walking away. I wanted to walk towards it.
Yeah. In many ways, signifies a lot of your career, like incredible bravery, just making sure there's that small comfort blanket of having, in this case, someone with you, but, you know,
Completely.
doing the preparation, all those other things. You always looked for something just to give you that little parachute if you needed it.
But journalism is very team, you know, it's very team orientated. So I suppose that's really key to how it's very easy to be brave when you've got, you know, people that are helping you, quietly taking the mickey, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sadly, we're just about out of time, but we'd just like to very quickly run through our quickfire questions with you.
Oh, no.
3 non-negotiables that you and the people around you need to buy into.
I don't like diva behaviour.
No divas, okay.
I hate people telling me to relax.
Okay.
I hate that because it normally means that they're not doing something that they probably should be doing.
Yeah.
And the third thing is I hate lateness. I'm very punctual.
Great.
Generally. And I had a boyfriend who reminded me years after we broke up that I had a 15-minute rule and that if he was 15 minutes late, I'd just gone. So rather than get angry or shout or grump or anything, I just go. And again, I've saved a lot of time not waiting for people.
There you go.
What's the single best piece of advice you've ever received?
Ask for things. Don't, particularly for women. You know, there's this great line, I'm going to quote Caitlin Moran, who says, from the Bible, the meek shall inherit the earth. And then she puts in block capitals, women, this does not apply to you. And it's such a good piece because, you know, a lot of women in their professional lives sort of think that they'll just be recognised. You know, oh, it must be my turn, it must be my turn. They don't realise that all the blokes in the room are going up and sort of going, can I have that? Can you send me there? Can I cover that story? And actually be the person that is prepared to ask for things because otherwise they never know that you want them, right? So I'd say that's been really helpful to me.
Brilliant. And does that tie in with the question, what one piece of advice would you give to a young Emily just starting out her career?
Well, the thing I'd give to like any teenager or anyone starting out actually is learn a language, right? Put in the time when you're 14, even if it feels boring and frustrating and embarrassing, you will never regret that. You know, it opens the world to you. So I'd say, yeah, learn a language. It's the thing I'm weirdly most proud of for myself, that I can open my mouth and blurt things out and not feel embarrassed about that. And I like that.
And the final question, Emily, is what's your one golden rule to live a high performance life?
Get enough sleep. Yeah, don't shortchange yourself on sleep. For me, it's sleep, and exercise. And the other thing I'd say is, on your days off, I stay in my gym kit because I get so much more done. So if I don't have to put my work clothes on, I run around in trainers, I run around in, swimming kit, gym kit, I get more done.
Brilliant.
I love that.
You never get invited anywhere, but that's fine.
No problem. You leave early anyway, so it doesn't matter. Look, Honestly, thank you so much for that. We could have
Pleasure.
spoken for hours. I think for people who, like the whole world does, from the outside, have an opinion of you and your job and the life you've lived, to hear actually the strains and the stresses, to hear the detail that you go to hear what it's like in the public eye when an interview like that comes out, but then also to understand a bit about a really brave decision to walk away from the BBC, which, let's all be honest, 20 years ago, nobody did. Maybe even 5 years ago, nobody did it. So a really, really interesting insight, and we can't thank you enough for sharing that with the high performance audience.
Thank you so much.
Emily Maitlis,
Thanks.
ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hey guys, it's Jake here. Listen, before you go, please do me just one favour. Hit subscribe. It makes such a difference to us. The more subscribers we get, then the bigger the channel becomes. The bigger the channel becomes, the bigger the names we can attract and the more impact we can have for you. So thanks for watching, and please subscribe right now.